The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have two representatives from the House of Delegates. Delegate Scott Taylor, good to see you, sir.
Woody, it's great to be back with you.
Delegate Joe Lindsey, a freshman member, Virginia Beach Tidewater. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, sir.
Delegate Taylor, tell us a little bit about your district and how it is faring economically.
Sure. Well, the Fightin' 85th District in Virginia Beach encompasses Town Center, Mount Trashmore, the Kempsville area. And economically speaking, we're a blue-collar district, and we have tons of veterans. I think every other household is a veteran, which also means, unfortunately, that we've been hit pretty hard with sequestration. Right. And we have, I'll illustrate it with a story. I was walking the neighborhood, and I remember going to a door during my election, and I could see a big Navy flag, and so I was like, oh, this guy's going to be friendly because, of course, I'm a former Navy. And he comes to the door, and he knew who I was. He's like, Scott, I'm voting for you. I'm voting for you. But I got to tell you, this sequestration is making my family lose $1,000 every single month. And I don't know what I'm going to do, and I don't know how I'm going to replace that. So I think that really illustrates what's going on with a lot of folks in the 85th District and that uncertainty that's coming out of Washington. And we're going to have more of that, unfortunately, unless they get their act together up there. But otherwise, the 85th District is very proud folks, hard-working, and we're going to power through it, and we'll be better after the sequestration is done.
And, of course, that's one of the critical legs to the economy in the Tidewater area and, of course, throughout the Commonwealth. But you've also got tourism. You've also got agribusiness as well.
Sure, absolutely.
And tell us a little bit more about how important tourism is.
Tourism's hugely important in the Tidewater area in Virginia Beach. It creates tons of jobs, creates tons of tax revenue for us. Obviously, Virginia Beach is a good destination. We've benefited from, quite frankly, when there were high gas prices, we were benefiting a lot because people weren't flying. Right. They were driving and coming down there, which is good because then it gives them exposure to Virginia Beach, and then we'll, of course, keep them coming back because it's such a wonderful area, of course, as my man knows here. And so in the 85th District, of course, we have plenty of folks who are in the tourism business or who work in the tourism business, or indirectly they're affected by it. So it's very, very important in our area.
And I know you're on the Finance Committee in the House, Science, Technology, and I believe counties, cities, and towns?
Transportation.
Transportation? All right.
Transportation, county, cities, and towns, and then now finance as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Which is also very, very important for the Hampton Roads area and transportation.
Absolutely. Delegate Lindsey, welcome to the General Assembly. How has it been so far?
So far, a lot of moving parts. You know, it's about being thrown in the deep end and learning to swim.
We were talking earlier about your schedule, which is obviously very busy. All of you have busy schedules, but you aren't getting much time with your family at home, are you?
Well, you know, thankfully, I've got an understanding wife of 28 years, and she appreciates that this is public service. So I'm here during the week, and I'm back home with my wife and kids over the weekend. Tell
us a little bit about your background and experience and what got you involved in politics.
I am a practicing attorney. I've practiced for 30 years. I was a substitute judge for 15 years, and so knowing the law and being a practitioner of the law is very much ingrained in me. This was, you know, while I didn't anticipate at this point in my life looking towards elective office, this probably was a natural fit to me because as a lawyer who tries to interpret and argue the laws, now as the legislator trying to make the laws better, it just seems to just be a symmetry.
And so what's the composition of your district geographically and also in terms of the demographics?
I represent the 90th House District. I have the southeastern most portion of Norfolk and westernmost portion of Virginia Beach. 40% Virginia Beach, 60% Norfolk. I would echo Scott's sentiments. It's probably blue collar, working class. A lot of people who probably lower to middle income.
And what committee assignments do you hold?
I am on courts committee as well as education and privileges and
I
elections.
believe that's the oldest standing committee in the House of Delegates.
As
if
a
my memory
freshman
serves me
member,
correct.
yes, and as a freshman member, I'm quite pleased for the committee assignments that the speaker has entrusted to me.
Great. Scott, can you talk to us a little bit more about the port, for example, and why it's so important? I understand that the Panama Canal has been upgraded, so to speak. There are these large container ships that are now coming through. The Port of Virginia is one of two on the eastern seaboard that can handle those large cargo ships now.
Well, the port is a huge economic engine, not just for the Hampton Roads area, but for the state of Virginia, of course. And as you mentioned, Panama, I spent a lot of time in Panama, and it's pretty fascinating to see the actual canal and how little space these ships had going through there. So it was definitely necessary for them to expand that to accommodate these huge Panamax ships that are coming through now. The Port of Virginia is very important for the eastern seaboard and very important for Virginia because we already have an advantage over a lot of these other ports as far as depth goes. I believe it's 50 or 55 feet. I'm probably getting that mixed up. But we're 5 feet deeper, basically, than just about every port on the East Coast, and they're scrambling to catch up. So in that interim time, of course, we need to go out there and get contracts, long-term contracts with some of these ships that come through to come here. And, of course, we're very close to the biggest percentage of population in the country. Why the port is hugely important for diversification, I believe, as well, of our economy, because, of course, as you know, Virginia is very dependent on government spending and stuff of such this nature. We're so well positioned because of the port to export our services and our goods to the world. And for every dollar that comes in with exporting business, it's $4 created in economic activity for here. So I see the port as not only a current economic engine, but also part of our future as far as diversification of our economy.
And obviously, transportation in that area is critical. It's
Critical.
You got to maintain roads. You have to build new roads. You have a lot of tunnels and bridges there. Talk to us a little bit about those critical needs.
Well, because of Hampton Roads, certainly on the south side, we have a geographical challenge with all the water, of course, and we have to have these tunnels, and we have to make sure that we're properly funding transportation to allow for those corridors for port traffic, for coming in here, and quite frankly, we need to incentivize another layer of economic activity. So currently, the port is mostly a pass-through port. So goods come through Virginia Port. They get on a train or they get on trucks and they're gone, and then they get assembled somewhere else and then distributed somewhere else. So what we need to do is, number one, of course, maintain our transportation corridors and improve on them so that we can create another economic activity to take the goods that come to this port and assemble them here and then distribute them from here, which would create a whole new level of economic activity and, again, will contribute to the diversification of our economy.
Absolutely. What about veterans in your district? I assume that you have a lot of veterans in your district as well.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about Hampton Roads, and and with the naval facilities here, we've got a lot of active duty and veterans. The situation is one where, and I just thought about this as we were talking about opportunities. Workforce development is going to be key in terms of the 90th House District and how we go forward. And as it ties into veterans, I actually have a bill in place that seeks to give veterans educational credits for their service training. So and that also helps them transition, in my opinion, from their past service to the nation to going forward and being able to have well-paying jobs.
For instance, if someone were a medic and returning from Iraq or Afghanistan, they probably know more than someone who's attending school to get a certificate in that. I assume your bill would help someone in that regard.
Absolutely. If you think about the training on the battlefield, it transitions quite well with being able to operate in circumstances less than ideal. It probably makes it a cakewalk as far as the training otherwise.
What about encouraging veterans to become entrepreneurs? There's a lot of red tape in terms of starting a business. I know you know that more than anybody else. You should know it as well because you're a practicing attorney. That's a small business. What can we do to help especially our veterans in that regard?
It's interesting that you bring that up because one of the bills that I'm carrying for the for Secretary Harvey is a bill that will allow for funding opportunities for small business opportunities for veterans.
Tell us how difficult it is to become an entrepreneur in the Commonwealth, or how easy it is compared to maybe other states and jurisdictions.
Well, you know, Virginia is open for business. There's no doubt about that. But there's always room for improvement. I think that any entrepreneur starting anywhere, of course, faces an uphill battle, right? It's very difficult to put yourself out there and to make something, take something from nothing and make it work, right? So I think that veterans are very well suited for that, and I certainly appreciate my colleague's bill here that's going to help folks in it. And we know that we have approximately 10,000 veterans that get out of the military every single year in the Hampton Roads area. We're going to have 1 to 1.5 million veterans exiting into the private sector from these two wars, from the longest one of the the longest war in American history, and Virginia needs them. You know, we want them here, absolutely. So we want to make it friendlier and easier for them to start businesses. Virginia is doing a great job. We were just in a military caucus yesterday, and there's a whole slew of bills that are veteran friendly and dealing with helping them become entrepreneurs and incentivizing employers to hire them as well too, which is very, very, very important. But I will say that Virginia is open to business, and we are consistently improving on the ease of starting a business and the reduction of taxes and things such as that nature to again diversify Virginia's economy from just government spending.
Now, what kind of access do veterans in the Virginia Beach area have to the Veterans Administration? I understand that obviously that there's a big building in Washington, D.C., but there are not many facilities here in the Commonwealth, but I understand that there's a move afoot to change that.
There is a move afoot to change that. In fact, there's a bill in right now that's going to put a Veterans Care Center in Virginia Beach, which I am very happy about. As we talked about, my district, and certainly Mr. Lindsey's district, same thing. There is a plethora of veterans that are in the district, and there is an underserved need, of course, for veterans care in that area. What I will say is Virginia does a great job of having veteran services. There's a veteran services rep in Virginia Beach, right in downtown, right in my district, that can help folks out and help them navigate that monstrosity that is the federal Veterans Administration bureaucracy. So Virginia does a really good job, and you know, we have some very motivated and dedicated folks, not just in the legislature, but also advocacy groups as well too, to make sure that transitioning veterans integrate back into society well, and that health care for veterans, the ease of navigation for them, because again, out of those 1 to 1.5 million folks that are going to be integrating back into society, we see an increased amount of traumatic brain injury and PTSD as well too in these folks, because they've been doing back to back. You've had a small amount of people who have consistently been going forward and on our behalf, and we need to make sure that they have care for years to come.
And correct me if I'm wrong, at one time I think there was a proposal to create a special veterans court to deal with the specific needs of veterans when they had run-ins with the law. Is that something that you're familiar with?
It is something that I'm familiar with, and you know, you have some of these guys that have come back, of course, that are in their transition period, integrating back into society. There are some challenges. There are some specific challenges that war creates, and it's incumbent upon us to recognize those challenges and make sure that those folks are getting help, and they're, at least initially, and if they're diagnosed with that they're not getting penalized for something that potentially may be out of their control.
Right. Is Oceana the largest employer in the Tidewater area?
You're actually probably better to ask Scott about that.
Okay.
But as to that point on the military courts and the veteran courts, I can tell you that there is a move afoot to really take into consideration the special interests of veterans in terms of the PTSD exposure, in terms of how war impacts them in terms of their ability to function. We have the mental health courts that are very active in the Hampton Roads region right now. We also have courts mental health courts, drug courts, and also the veteran court programs, all designed to look at those special needs, and unfortunately, many times over, persons who've been in the battle areas come back scarred, and they're not themselves, and this is a court, or these are court programs that are designed to touch upon those special needs.
Tell us a little bit about some of the legislation you have introduced as a freshman. I know there's some initiatives you have around voter identification.
Yeah, certainly, and probably my colleague would say that is something that doesn't need to be addressed. But in the change of administrations and the change of control of the Senate, there was a bill that dealt with voter identification, and while my party has no disagreement with having identification, it's a fix to a problem that didn't, in my opinion, ever exist. And when you've got a situation where someone has an identification that's recently expired, and you're told that, well, we don't know that that identification still matches up with you, that seems to just not make sense. So we want to go beyond the Attorney General's opinion. We want to make sure that persons who take the effort of getting out to the polls are not disenfranchised and not afforded their opportunity to vote. And we believe that whether they have a valid identification or even an identification that has expired, that there's still the opportunity that that person is still representative of who's on that identification, and they should be afforded an opportunity to vote.
And I'll afford you the opportunity to respond.
No, I think we're going to agree on more than we disagree on, and I think that as my colleague said, he spoke about it is important that you do have identification. As far as dealing with that specific problem of an expired ID, I'm interested to see how we deal with it. I haven't seen the bill on it that you have. I think it's you that deals with that. But I think it's very important that you know that folks that are voting. But I would certainly agree with my colleague that we should never disenfranchise anybody in their basic right of voting in this democracy.
Real property. I know that you have a bill that will warm a lot of people's hearts in terms of the assessments and the ability to challenge those assessments.
I have a wonderful, heartwarming property bill. Currently, if you have property and you have a house or you have lots and your assessment is, you believe, unfair, you would fight it. You would go to the assessor and you would say, I believe it's unfair. I'm paying too much taxes. I believe the value is a lot less than you have valued it. And then you would, if that didn't work, you go to the Board of Equalization or whatever the locality has. And then if they still said, no, you're wrong, and if you ended up in court, and you go to challenge your assessment, you number one, have the burden of proof, and then number two, you are presumed to be wrong, and the assessor's presumed to be right. So as you can see, it's almost an insurmountable hurdle, because even if you have comparables that show the value of your property, it may be you're presumed to be wrong, and you have the burden of proof. So this bill simply puts the needle towards the taxpayer. So when you come into court, you would be able to be on an equal playing field. So I think it's very important that folks aren't being overtaxed, of course, and if they can show that the value of their property is in fact less than what the assessor is, that they should be paying less taxes, they should absolutely have the ability to do so.
So what's been the response to that bill by your colleagues and others?
Overwhelmingly positive. Of course, the localities are a little upset with it. They have legitimate concerns. They don't want to clog the courts up, which I understand that. And then, of course, they're looking at lost revenue potentially. Albeit it wouldn't be in a vast majority of things, because this is a minority of folks who would have to deal with this, that may have unique properties or something such as that nature. But overwhelmingly positive for the people that are out there, because of course no one should have to pay more taxes than they're supposed to be paying.
Right. Body cameras, I understand you have an interest in terms of some legislation.
I actually requested that it be tabled and referred to the Governor's Commission. It appears that there's a study that's underway by the governor, and it's about body camera placements on law enforcement officers. It's also about looking at statistics in terms of stops and profiling, racial profiling. And I think we're moving in the right direction. We've got a dialogue. We've got the stakeholders coming to the table and talking about the issues. No one believes that this is a situation where this rare few persons in law enforcement may exploit their positions of authority, but it impacts all of us. and it becomes a mindset or a concern within the community as to whether or not this injustice is pervasive. We believe that the body camera legislation, as well as the legislation related to incident reportings about aggressive conduct by police officers, should be studied and undertaken. There is now such a study that has been championed by the governor's administration, and we believe that it's going to be a talking point that helps us going forward in terms of understanding some of these issues.
So you started the dialogue.
Yeah.
And of course you understand both sides because you were a prosecuting attorney at one time and worked very closely with law enforcement.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not a, it shouldn't be perceived as a pro or anti law enforcement bill. It really is about oversight, and it's about it's about restoring public confidence, and that's done by making sure that issues aren't just overlooked, and even these unpleasant issues are brought to the table and thoroughly interviewed and reviewed.
Restoring public confidence is on the agenda again, especially given the unfortunate circumstances of our former governor. And there's again talk of modifying the current ethics statutes in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'd like you to talk about where things stand now from your point of view and what you think may be necessary.
Sure. Well, I think that there's certainly a movement afoot, and it's coming through. I haven't seen the final piece of it, but it's very important to have public confidence. Of course, I mean that is a fundamental thing that has to happen. At the same time, internally, we have to come up with something that everyone understands, that it's very easy, so that you don't inadvertently do something wrong that you didn't understand. Because quite frankly, that the McDonald trial really threw everything into sort of a flux because it was difficult to reconcile state law with federal law, and you didn't know what are they going to come after you for? And I want to know that because I'm certainly not corrupt. I want to make sure that everything's above board and everything is correct. So we don't want to just inadvertently get in trouble for something that we didn't understand. So it's very important internally that it's black and white. There's no gray in there. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. And I think that's also important externally for the public as well too. If it's black and white, you will not take a gift that's over $100, or you won't take any gifts, or whatever the legislation is finally. I'm comfortable with any of it. I'm comfortable with no gifts. I'm comfortable with, sometimes folks, they'll get dinners or something like that because they're trying to educate you on a subject, and that may be an advocacy organization. Right. It may be a lobbyist. It may, At the same time, I think that when you're entrusted with elected office, I think people believe that you're going to do the right thing. So if you believe if somebody buys you a cheeseburger or something like that you're going to do something wrong, you shouldn't be there in the first place, right? So I don't know what the final legislation is going to be. I know we need something because we do need to regain the public trust, and I know it needs to be black and white so that everybody understands what it is, understands the lines that they can and cannot cross. I think that's helpful and fundamental for internally for the legislators themselves and for the public.
Now, some people have suggested the need for an ethics commission, another agency, if you will, that would provide counsel and guidance, but also police the activities of members of the General Assembly. Do you think that's something that's...
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that point up. One of the things I think is very important, because we are part-time legislators. So if you're looking at federal folks and sort of the federal folks, they have a huge budget, every year budget, so that they can have someone who does nothing but make sure that they're cooperating with all the ethics rules and laws and such as that nature, and the donations, they can send it back if it's the wrong thing. We don't have the budget. We don't have the manpower to be able to do that. So I think it is important to have, whether it's a third party or something internally to the Republican caucus, the Democrat caucus, however it is, you need to have someone that you're like, oh, well, I'm not sure about this. Let me report this to show that in good faith that I see that there may be a problem, but I don't have the capacity of someone who has the only job of making sure that we're that we're cooperating with everything. So I think it is important to have some sort of commission or whatever it is to be able that's a resource for members that can help them navigate the fine line, the black and white line, which I think we should have.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to assume that there was some kind of ethics orientation for freshmen.
Absolutely. The situation with the former governor has us all on alert. We realize that being elected officials, we're put in positions of public trust, and it's important to represent those very important values. And whereas the order of the day perhaps may have been, this is the way business has always been done, there's a change in attitude and an appreciation for the fact that we need to err on the side of caution, that if there's some question about disclosure versus non-disclosure, that you need to take it to the next level of full disclosure.
And of course, defining terms is critical. Who's a close personal friend? To what degree of relativeness, so to speak, in terms of those that are close to you as family members, can you deal with without getting into trouble? And then the intangible versus tangible gifts.
Can you meet new friends?
Exactly.
Can you meet new
Right,
friends?
exactly. So all those things are in the mix, and they will be debated, obviously. I want to turn to another subject that's been in the news recently, and that has to do with daycare and some unfortunate incidents. I think there was one death, and there's some legislation dealing with more regulation of people who provide daycare. Do you have an opinion on that? Have you had an opportunity to look at the legislation and form an opinion?
I have not had an opportunity to look at the legislation and form an opinion, but I have a 2-year-old son who's in daycare almost every, during the week, and so I think it's very important that there are responsible regulations to ensure his safety and all the safety of the other children that are out there. So I can't speak specifically on the bill, but absolutely they should be held to a high standard because they have our most precious resource with them.
Has that been an issue that you've studied as of yet?
No, I'm familiar with the bill. I do know that it's working its way through the subcommittees right now, and there is very much support for the fact that there has to be a standard in place to make sure that some of the daycares that get licenses are up to a particular standard in terms of how many people they have in, what type of electrical outlets they have, what type of training they have in terms of CPR, and things of that ilk. So.
Great. Well, it's so good to have you here. Good to see you, Freshman Delegate Joe Lindsey and Delegate Scott Taylor. The citizens of Virginia Beach and Tidewater should be proud of both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.